Okay, please make a friend, and we're going to probably use every chair. We have 70 chairs in the room. I have Zia, I think, putting out some more chairs along the wall here, which will be great. And I also have overflow seating in the auditorium where our live stream will be shown. And so there'll be a spot for everybody. What I don't probably will have enough of is pizza, but since you got here early, y'all are set.
Isn't that typical? He'll just make his usual grand entrance. Not enough chairs. All right, that's Terry, right there. I hear him.
How's the pizza? Is it good? I know.
Okay, we're putting out some more chairs. I am very excited that this is such a well-attended event. We're ordering more pizza as we speak. Get excited, so there'll be some hot pizza here. Oh, look at this. I know where my students are. Okay. So more pizza's coming, and so that incentivizes you to stay till the end, okay? Because it's going to be a great discussion. So yeah, there'll be some hot pizza here toward the end. And so don't leave hungry, okay? So we're going to go ahead and get started here in a minute.
Got a big crowd tonight.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, like
Well, you get free pizza.
free pay. The food, not us, right? They came for the food.
All right, are y'all ready?
Are you going to introduce us or
Going to introduce just really short.
really short?
Really short.
Yeah,
Okay.
And I'll get it rolling.
And then you'll get it rolling.
And how long? At what point should I stop for Q&A? Since our close is 7:15. Is that right?
Yeah, so I would say maybe 5 till.
I'll leave at least 20, 25
Yeah.
minutes for Q&A.
Yeah. Whatever's a good stop.
Well, you know what? With this size crowd.
Or before that.
I just
Yeah,
might do
that's
that.
it. Yeah, that's a great.
Okay, good.
Okay, we're going to get started here. Welcome everyone to this edition of Pizza and Perspectives by University Life. We're doing this in partnership with Mason Votes and the Schar School of Policy and Government. My name is Melissa Terry. I'm the director of University Life here at Mason Square, and I welcome you all. Thank you all so much for coming. Pizza and Perspectives is a signature program of University Life Mason Square, and the goal is to involve students, faculty, guests, community leaders across disciplines from the community in meaningful and rational dialogue on relevant topics. Can't think of a better one than this. Welcome to today's discussion on the 2024 election. We're thrilled to have you join us here in person and virtually on YouTube. As we explore the pivotal factors shaping both Virginia and national politics at this critical juncture. This event offers a unique opportunity to delve into the current political climate, understand the political impacts of the 2024 presidential election, and engage with our esteemed expert panel. And so before we begin, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our panelists. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and I'm going to hand it over to Dean Rozell of the Schar School. Can I get a round of applause? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Melissa. And I'm Mark Rozell. I'm the Dean of the Schar School of Policy and Government, a political scientist by training. Absolutely delighted by the turnout here, and especially delighted to have this distinguished panel this evening to try to unpack the meaning of this latest election cycle. I think you're in for a real treat here. We have former Governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe. And Associate Professor of Political Science, Jennifer Victor. She just won the applause meter, man.
Yeah. She got to have her students here. They paid for the pizza.
That's right. And also distinguished visiting professor and former member of the House of Delegates and good friend, David Ramadan. We're going to get this started right away. So I'm going to be the moderator for the panel. I'm going to ask some questions. They're going to be free to give the appropriate answers to these questions. And then about halfway through, we will open it up to the group. So let me start with this. There's, in political science theory, scholars talk about realigning elections and realignments in American politics. So I want to pose to the panel whether something different happened in this election cycle that is not necessarily unique to this election itself, but potentially could have some long-term implications for different voting groups in the United States, reaching to the level potentially of being looked back upon in the future as a fundamental realigning election in American politics. You want to start, Professor Victor?
Sure, I'll take that.
Okay.
So when we talk about realignments in elections, really what we're talking about is how the coalitions and the different parts of the population align with the political parties across time. And political scientists, historians tend to look at the arc of U.S. history and say there's been 6 or 7 party systems throughout time. And when a party system goes from one to the other, it's because the coalitions that support each political party have really shifted. And we're a little bit too close to where this realignment may have occurred. I think to be certain, we need a little bit more perspective. But I'm reasonably confident that what we'll see 10, 20 years from now is a consensus that 2016 was sort of the pivotal year for this current realignment that we're still kind of in the middle of. And what the distinction between how the party coalitions are aligned now to how they were between, say, 1968 and 2016 really has to do with, in the 68 to 2016 period, I would say the alignment was really on ideology. Liberals were Democrats, conservatives were Republicans. I know for the young folks in the room, that sounds like a normal way to organize politics, but it's not. It's actually a very unstable way for politics to organize. Of course, I'm oversimplifying. The coalitions were much more complex than that. But what we have now is not so much an ideological organization of the parties to the electorate. But what we see is in the Democratic coalition, we see a big divide on education. So people with college degrees are tending to vote more Democrat. People without college degrees are tending to vote more Republican. In the Republican Party, we have this huge populist wave. Populism is, a not uncommon political phenomenon that we have seen throughout U.S. history at different moments. We've seen it in other countries. It can be either liberal or conservative. We have a more conservative form of populism in the U.S. right now, but it's basically anti-elitism, anti-establishment, sort of running against the grain of what people may be frustrated with. And there's a lot of things to be frustrated with in the United States right now. And I think what we saw in this election, I would call this a wave election. And I think one of the words that gets thrown around a lot these days is mandate, that there was a mandate. When you see a wave election like this, a mandate. But I want to push back pretty hard against the mandate narrative for a couple of reasons. And I'll stop filibustering here in a second and let other people talk. But a mandate suggests, A, that there is some kind of consensus. We don't have consensus. We basically saw if you look at the whole U.S. adult population, about a third of them voted for Donald Trump, about a third of them voted for Kamala Harris, and about a third of them didn't vote. Right? So there's no consensus on any particular thing. Mandate also suggests that just because you go to the voting booth, you have two choices in front of you, you make one of those choices, and that means that you are signing up for an entire long list of a policy agenda. But people have many complicated reasons and motivations for how they cast their vote. So to use the suggestion that a party won as a reason to say, no, we have a mandate to enact policy X, Y, or Z, just really doesn't hold water with the evidence. So I would say what we saw was a universal shift towards the Republican Party in this election in sort of a wave pattern. And it comes across almost all demographic groups and almost all geographies. Every single county in Virginia had lower voter turnout in 2024 than it did in 2020. And the Republican-leaning counties had just slightly less lower voter turnout than the Democratic-leaning counties. So that tells me the answer to explain what happened in this election is something systematic, right? There's a lot of talk these days of, oh, it's this subpopulation, or it's Latino males, or it's women, or it's this, or it's that. And that analysis will go on. But when you see a universal shift, we need to look for universal patterns. This was an anti-incumbent sentiment wave election that really explains how we got here.
Okay, let me turn to the others if you want to address that question, or I can move to the next question. Governor?
No, I'm never a big believer in realignments. I think elections, I think what you've seen, 12 of the last 14 elections we've had have been change elections. People want to change the person who is in power. That was what you saw this time. People who voted, 40% of the people voted, said their number one issue was the economy, and Donald Trump won that by 21 points. 20% of the people voted said immigration was the number one issue. Trump won that by 71%. Only 11%, which we thought the Dobbs decision, because of 22, was going to be a huge turnout of women and young people, only 11% of the people who voted in 2024 said that abortion was their number one issue. Kamala won that by 76%. But going into this election, this was going to be a hard thing for Vice President Harris. 70% of Americans thought that the country was headed in the wrong direction. Equal amount thought the economy was in bad shape. Kamala Harris was the partner of Joe Biden. She was the vice president. So she had a very tough hand to deal with. I always thought right off the start, people wanted a change. Joe Biden got 81 million votes in 2020. Donald Trump got 75 million last week. That was because Trump was at a 31% approval rating and people wanted a change. 2016, Hillary, I would say, would have won that election, but for James Comey coming out 12 days before the election, totally turned independent women against us, 3-1 overnight. So, you know, you can always say shifts and so forth. I think for most people, they felt like the economy was not working for them. Their grocery prices were up, rent was up, they're paying their mortgage, they weren't happy, and I want to change. And you saw it this time. But it was as I say, Biden got 81 million and Trump got 75 million this year. And Kamala got 71 million. There's still votes in California. But we went from 81 million, this is what I find fascinating, 81 million voted for Joe Biden. 4 years later, 71 million people voted for Kamala Harris. That is a 10 million person drop. That's extraordinary.
Delegate Ramadan, do you want to add to that question, or was this a one-time event type election or something?
Point of privilege. Dean Rozell. First, thank you for all of you for taking the time showing up here today on Veterans Day in the evening. I know you're all here for the pizza, but that's fine. Any veterans or military service members in the room? Thank you, sir, for your service. Any veterans here? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your service. You'll find that on this panel, there's not going to be much disagreement here. His Excellency, do you all know, my students know that, the title of the Governor of Virginia is His Excellency, the Governor of Virginia, and I got to tell him that at least once in this panel. So
The only one in America.
only one in America. Only one in America who carries that title forever.
It's true, he's right.
Yep.
I mean, my first day in office, I walked in and said, Your Excellency, I'm turning around. I said, I'm a kid from Syracuse, New York. I ain't the King of England.
His Excellency
Call me
is
Perry.
absolutely correct. You Democrats lost quite a bit of millions of votes. For my students that are in the room as well, you know that I'm the biggest fan for Jennifer Victor, and I'm not going to disagree with much of what she said either. There is absolutely no realignment here. There is no mandate either. I say there's no realignment, not just no mandate. It's not a realignment. Donald Trump won by 3% of 30% or of 60% of the people, right? Because we got third that didn't vote, of 60% of the people. That is, and I teach political science as professor of practice, not math, but that's about 1.8%, right, of the total population. That is not a mandate, and that is not a realignment where the country is. That is one of those alignment of certain populations that prioritized today versus the future. I am going to quote your friend, Jim Carville. It was the economy stupid, it was the inflation stupid that did this. People did not differentiate between what an economy is and what inflation is. We have one of the best economies in history. Our stock market is at its highest, unemployment's at its lowest. That's good news for all of you young people in the room. You're going to find jobs when you graduate. But the cost of goods was expensive. And people that are buying eggs and milk and pumping gas for reasons that had nothing to do with the current president of the United States blamed it on the current president and then blamed it on Kamala Harris. That's how it works. Well, life is nasty, brutish, and short. Who said that? Yep. That's the world that we live in today. And we just got to deal with it. Now, there are a lot of statistics, as Dr. Victor said, and a lot of reasons that we're going to pinpoint. There were some surprises, right? The working class Americans rejected the Democrats because they simply said today's issues, those kitchen table issues, are more important than women's rights, than immigration rights, than democracy. January 6th, folks, was not even registering. we got to keep all of us that in mind as we go forward, whether we're studying it or whether some of us are practicing politics. And where does that take us is going to be fascinating in the next 4 years, but it's going to be some troublesome times.
So there are a lot of retrospective analyses going on right now about, for the Democrats, what exactly went wrong, what could have been done differently. Maybe don't spend too much time on that, whether they should have had an open competition for the nomination, whether Biden should have gotten out earlier or never said he was going to run for a second term. We can talk about that for a few moments, but also think prospectively, what does the Democratic Party need to do to get back those lost 10 million voters, right? Even more importantly, do you want to start with that, Governor?
Yeah. So knowing what we know, and Kamala had a really tough hand, and I think, first of all, our data was all wrong. Everybody had us winning. New York Times had us winning. Ann Seltzer had us winning in Iowa on Saturday night by 3 points.
Boy, was that wrong.
Was that wrong?
Yeah.
So we got to get a look at all our data analytics. But okay, so if you look at the exit data, and everybody says 40% was the economy, and I'm unhappy with the economy and so forth, they wanted to change, then the logical answer would have been that President Biden should not have run again and should have made his decision earlier. Now, everybody talks about having an open convention. I used to be the chairman of this great national party. There is no way with 100 days to go you could put a primary process together. You did never want to go to our convention with 3,973 delegates and say, oh, go pick whoever you want. It would be utter chaos. So the die was dealt, I think, with the president who made the decision that he was running again. And he stayed in, obviously, the debate. I had him at my house on June 18th. We had a huge event, and I raised him $8.5 million. I had Jill Biden and Bill and Hill. It was a great old hootenanny there, and everything was great. And then we had the debate a week later, and then everything went down from there. So the timing was tough. I give Kamala credit. I think she ran a very good campaign with the hand that she was dealt. She raised a record amount of money, $1.3 billion. It's never happened in American politics. So it wasn't for lack of money. It's just people were angry and they wanted to change. In 2020, they wanted to change, and they threw Trump out. And so the answer to your question is, taking the political theory forward, if Biden had gotten out, we would have had a primary. We probably would have had a new nominee who then could run on change. We could not run on change because she was the vice president to the president of the United States.
Thank you. So looking back, Dr. Victor?
So in political science, we talk about the fundamentals of an election. And prior to last week, the fundamentals models that I would look at included 3 characteristics. These are fundamentals that over the last 60 years almost perfectly predict every presidential election outcome. And they have nothing to do with the candidates or the context of the campaign. It's just the characteristics under which the election takes place. And they are the approval rating of the sitting party, president, the growth in GDP, the growth of the economy measured in GDP in the second quarter of the election year, and the length of time that the incumbent party has been in office. Because typically, I would have said 2 weeks ago, typically one-term presidents get reelected, and two-term presidents, the party does not get reelected. And so whichever situation you're in is which way the balance goes. So in this election, I looked at it and said, incumbent party, very unpopular. Joe Biden's approval rating was around 38%. Economy, GDP, this year, we've had a growth economy. Inflation was down, unemployment was down. That was looking, the macroeconomic trends were good. So that was a point in Democrats' favor. And then the tiebreaker is incumbency. And I thought, well, first term incumbent, and so probably he will get reelected, and so the fundamentals are in the Democrats' favor. And the update now is where I think the models are going, is that the more predictive fundamental models are those that discount incumbency entirely. So now we've had 2 presidential elections in a row where the incumbent party lost, right? So Donald Trump was first-term incumbent and lost in 2020, and now Biden. And there's some other research that suggests that during times of partisan polarization, incumbency advantage is just less, right? And so, and I'll do a public mea culpa here. Back in like February, March, April, when there was some clamoring, like, should Biden drop out? Could we have a Democratic primary? I was pretty firmly in the camp of, if you're a party in power, you do not give up incumbency, because having that incumbency is a big advantage electorally. Until we got to that first debate, and then I, like everybody else, hopped on the train. No, Democrats need to dump their candidate. Which they did. And so in a way, the fact that we saw the Democratic Party, to me, doing the very rational thing through the whole period, that they left the incumbent in because that's what they should have done. They got rid of him when it was clear he couldn't win. They put in the next most possible popular candidate, the vice president. The party rallied around her like nobody's business. We'll never see that again in our lifetimes. That was an incredible consolidation. And then ran a very strong campaign, a very disciplined campaign. Were there weaknesses in the campaign? A lot of people, I think, point to that performance or the appearance she had on the television program The View, where somebody had asked her, what would you do differently than Joe Biden? And she basically couldn't think of anything. Like, that's bad. When you can't find a way to separate yourself from the person with 38% approval rating, that's not a great outcome. But I don't think she lost the election because she gave a bad interview, right? She lost the election because she was tied to the super unpopular incumbent party. So there was one political science fundamentals model that was put out this year that perfectly predicts every single outcome for every single state. And that is a fundamentals model that looks at the state of the economy by state, not just the macro national economy, but by each state, how their economy is doing, and then the presidential approval ratings. And that model of fundamentals predicts perfectly. So to get more to your question, Mark, then it begs the question, could the Democrats have won with any candidate at all? Or was the deck just stacked against them this year because they were sort of hung with the pandemic economy, or the pandemic economy hangover, as it were? And the fundamentals model would suggest it wouldn't have mattered who they put in. Now, to push back on that just a little bit, Donald Trump, the electoral margin in non-battleground states, so in 43 of the states, plus DC, so 44, there were, the vote margin was Republican +6. So on average, +6 points towards the Republicans. In the 7 battleground states, the vote margin was +3. So that tells me that in the place where the campaigning was happening, the Harris campaign did much better than in the country at large, right? That tells me there's a little bit of a campaign effect there, that the campaign did better in terms of the outcome than they would have in the absence of a campaign. So had they made some other campaign choices, could they have gotten that down even further? Maybe, but they were fighting an uphill battle all the way.
Okay. Delegate Ramadan.
So I spent 2 weeks, I do a lot of TV interviews, mostly in Arabic for international stations. And I spent 2 weeks talking about this. And this was pretty much the map by almost every pollster out there, right? The 2 days before the election, the last 2 days, 8 out of the 10 polls had her up by 1 or 2 points. And with the prediction that she'll end up with anywhere between 276 with one prediction up to 304 Electoral College. And I would sit there and analyze based on those models and numbers. Well, to say the least, all these models were wrong, right? I mean, wrong. And we looked like fools, everybody that talked on TV about that. In the margin of error. But for the margin of error to swing one way on all 7 states, when the margin of error swung the other way for 5 or 6 U.S. senators in those 7 states, made the models wrong. We have to adjust that, first and foremost. But let me put the models out. Let me put political science away. Let me put all of this away. Let me share a couple stories from Southwest Virginia. I'm married to a Southwestern Virginian, and I spent time in the red part of the state, of the Commonwealth. And that part of the Commonwealth is different than Northern Virginia. Anybody from Southwest Virginia here? Where from? Danville. Franklin County, very close to Danville. You will agree with me that it doesn't look like Northern Virginia. Doesn't think like Northern Virginia, doesn't vote like Northern Virginia or any metropolitan area. but it looks like the majority of the United States today. And the average voter there, who used to vote Democrat back in the day during the Byrd machine, and prior to that, they considered themselves working class, whether they are or not, had enough with multiple things. And that I'm bringing it back to the question, what do Democrats do going forwards? They had enough with gender rights. It worked. It sold there that is not what they want to talk about. They believed, by the way, that you send your boy to school and he comes back as a girl. Okay, nobody sent their boy in America at school and came back as a girl. That just doesn't happen, right? They may call him or her a different pronoun at school, and that became a problem for parents. They believed in that's not what America is all about for them. They believed the idea that immigrants like myself are going to take over the country and kick them out of their jobs and take away even the labor jobs. These were labor and unionized folks that believed that immigrants are coming in and they're going to take the jobs away. And immigration became an issue. They believed that Haitians ate cats and dogs. And when we stopped talking about cats and dogs and talked about the geese, they weren't okay with eating geese, even though they all hunt geese. Right? So what do Democrats need to do? They need to go back outside of the metropolitan areas and go to this voting base that they used to have for decades and that they lost.
You just achieved a milestone. Is it okay to say, or?
Yeah, I apologize. I keep on my phone, but my daughter-in-law has been in labor for 10 hours. She just 1 minute ago delivered my first grandchild. So.
Hey! Boy or girl? His Excellency Grandpa McAuliffe.
Yeah, he.
Oh, he doesn't look old enough to be a grandpa.
So, anything more on looking forward for the Democratic Party? I want to turn this to you, Terry. If you don't mind.
So, yeah, in fact, just before I came here, Bill Clinton's in town. I went over and had a drink with him, spent an hour and a half. So I just got his full analysis. Well, like, I don't have an hour and a half to give it to you. But, listen, going to my theory, it changed election. There's circumstances you cannot control. It looks most likely like the Republicans will win the House of Representatives in addition to having the Senate and the White House, which I love Hakeem Jeffries. I want him to be Speaker. But political analyst says, let him have all three. Let him go do it and see where we go. Let's see what happens if he puts these tariffs in place and every family now has $4,000 of additional cost to them. Let's see what happens if he indeed is going to deport all these people and who's going to start working in this country. So there are a lot of big things out there that he has promised to do that if he does, we have to be prepared to come out with what we're going to do. But going to my argument, a lot is going to depend how Donald J. Trump does over the course of the next couple of years.
Right.
They're going to have the megaphone. We're not. And for us to kill ourselves and, the hand-wringing at our parties going on, I mean, a lot of bedwetting, you know how it goes every election. It really doesn't matter what we do right now.
Thank you. So we're going to take questions in just a couple minutes. So put your hand back up in a few minutes so you don't have to get your hand tired. And just a couple more questions for the panel. Since we're in the Commonwealth of Virginia and there is no rest for the weary here, there's an election starting for next year here in the Commonwealth for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, legislative seats, local elections, starting with Delegate Ramadan. What's the impact of this year's election and what's going to happen next year? Is it necessarily predictive? History tells me that the party in the White House loses the governor's race except once.
Governor McAuliffe.
Right. 50 years.
Yeah.
Yep, he was the
one
only one who
exception,
broke that rule. Before I answer that, another point of privilege, Dean Rozell, I'd like to recognize in the audience, I see my former colleague, Delegate Vivian Watts, Chairwoman Watts. Thank you for being with us over there. Yes, the rule is, except when Terry McAuliffe broke it, the rule is that the opposite party of the presidency will win Virginia's election next year. So therefore, the Democrats will have the advantage next year to win the governor's mansion in Virginia. But it's not just that. I believe they have the advantage on the ground. As we all know, the Democrats already chose their nominee. It is current Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, who's stepped down. She'll finish her term, and she's running, and everybody else who's running against her dropped out. So therefore, she is the Democratic nominee. In practice, it'll become official. The Republicans have made up their mind. A lot of talk between, there's one announced official candidate now, the lieutenant governor. The attorney general was thinking about it. We'll probably see a few more that are going to run. They'll have a primary. They'll spend a lot of money. Abigail Spanberger will have the advantage. And, of course, the crazier things that'll come out of Washington will make it more and more appealing for Democrats to win the gubernatorial election next year.
Okay. Did you want to add to that either, Dr. Victor or Governor McAuliffe, about Virginia next year? Not necessary, not required.
Well, I think history always is. A lot's going to be determined. If Trump is tremendously successful and the economy is roaring,
It's a big F, sir.
right, no question. So we don't know the answer to all this. But likely is Democrats should not only win all three, we should sweep in the House of Delegates and increase our majority.
So let me turn to my last question for the panel, and then think about your questions, raise your hands in just a moment. We did see, going back to the first question, significant shifting in voting among certain racial ethnic groups. What was that all about? What do we attribute that? Social cultural issues? It's just the economy's stupid and working class voters across different profiles. You want to start, Dr. Victor?
Sure. So the most talked about subpopulation is Latino men. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but 13 points. Like there was a pretty big swing between the vote that Donald Trump got in 2020 of Latino men to this year. And a couple of things. So first, scholars of Latino politics will tell you that the longer an immigrant family has, like the more generations you get away from the immigrant experience, the more the family sort of starts to look like the rest of America. You get the sort of political assimilation almost. So the distribution of political behavior should sort of mirror what we see in the white population, for example. And so we've got a large Latino population in the United States. We have for a very long time. And so to some extent, one of the reasons we're seeing more Latinos vote Republican is because they're conservative. Like that is, that's their sort of natural political home ideologically. The Democratic Party has had a very strong, robust relationship with the African American community in the United States since the civil rights period in the mid-20th century, and largely with the Latino community, although that's been a little bit more mixed. But I think it's important to appreciate, particularly with the Latino community, that's a very diverse population. Like I'm throwing this word around like it means something, but it means lots of different things. It's lots of different populations. It is not a monolith. So I think what we are seeing is that, in a way, to a certain extent, I think this might ultimately turn into a positive point in terms of racial justice in the United States, because if you think through the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, the Democratic Party was really the party of non-whites and the Republican Party was the party of whites. And now, since the last couple of elections, if the non-white population is sort of starting to get spread across both political parties, when you have, whether it's an issue or an attribute or whatever that cuts across both political parties, that creates opportunities on which to build cross-partisan coalitions. And that's what we're missing in this country. We have so much polarization. We have so much, inequality where the top hat wearing people are, at one end of the scale, and you've got the lower economic class at the other end of the scale, and you've just got this wild economic mobility problem that's stagnant in the United States. That it's created this polarization. It creates this sort of embedding of partisanship and negative partisanship. And when you if you have the opportunity to build cross-partisan coalitions, whether it's on an issue or across a subpopulation or regionally or whatever it is, that's how politics worked throughout the whole 20th century. You had, conservative Democrats and you had liberal Republicans, and you could build bipartisan coalitions. So perhaps that's, I'm speculating, of course, but it's the fact that we're seeing some migration across non-white population might prove fruitful in the future for building bipartisan coalitions.
Can I just layer on that, since we're in Northern Virginia, and one of the striking findings in this election cycle was that Kamala Harris did really well in some Democratic-leaning areas of the state, Chesterfield, for example, even better than Joe Biden did. But in Northern Virginia, Prince William, Loudoun, Fairfax moved somewhat to the right, and the turnouts were rather disappointing. And so I sent a text message to Tom Davis, former Congress member, right? And what's going on here, Tom? And he said, one word: immigrants. I don't know. What was distinctive about Northern Virginia in this election cycle that the turnout rates were disappointing for Democrats, and these jurisdictions that have been the foundation, the bulwark of Democratic Party elections statewide, moved right this time?
Tom and I are good friends, but Tom and I have found a lot of disagreements. Blaming it on immigrants is not something that I'll do. There were a lot
but he wasn't blaming. Let me just be clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he was saying that's where the movement, he says,
Sure.
happened.
Sure.
Working with incomplete data.
Not really. Not really. When you get a close election, you can blame loss on every segment of society, and you can take credit in every segment of society, right? This was a 3% election. It's still that. So, and as Professor Victor started by saying, you can't. It was across genders. It was across social divisions. It was across backgrounds. There was the suburban white woman that broke more. There was the Latino men. There was the Arab American and the Muslim vote on the Palestinian Gaza issue. There was the Jewish vote. So that went both ways. So we can go down to try to analyze each and every one of those. The data is not out yet. I can't really go down to immigrants, but I'll agree with Jennifer again. I mean, immigrants have historically played a role in both parties and have walked away from both parties. Until the Iraq War, you used to have the majority of Arab Americans, the majority of Jewish Americans who, with everything happening in the Middle East, they still both voted for the Republicans. After the Iraq War, Arab Americans walked away from W and the Republicans. Until recently, you had most Arab Americans voting Democratic, and now they walked away from the Democratic Party because of the Middle East again. So there was the undervote. There are those that stayed at home. Did it make the difference in the election, by the way? I don't think it did. I don't think it even made the difference in Michigan. But even if it had, it wouldn't have made the across everywhere. But those are important. And on the immigrant, just one more answer on the immigrant. What both parties have failed over the years is they do, and I remember doing this in 2008. Michael Steele was lieutenant governor and was chairman of the GOP. We were both on NPR together from the convention in the Twin City. And Michael and I were talking live on radio about the immigrant vote. And he says, but we're doing a lot of outreach. And I said, Governor, we got to stop calling it outreach. He's like, you're right. We got to stop outreach. What are we going to do? And I said, you need to include. You need to engage and include. So what both parties have forgotten, and for years they do it, they go to them during the cycles. They do outreach, but they never engage and they never include throughout.
Long term. Yeah.
And long term. Yes. I did that in my elections. That's how I won, right? Barbara Comstock, our colleague, did that for the first couple sessions when she was in, and then the Trump era came and pushed everybody out. But individually, there have been people on both sides that did that. But as parties, they've always forgotten the immigrant vote as part and parcel, as being on the table, versus table dressing or just outreach when we need them for votes.
Governor?
Yeah, I would disagree 100% with Tom. Everybody likes to bash the immigrants and blame them for everything. I mean, let's be clear. Kamala Harris won the state by 6 points. Hillary Clinton won the state in 2016 by 5 points. She won it by 6. You can't hold the standard of Biden, who won the state by 10, which I remind you is the biggest win since Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president of the United States of America. And the reason was, in 2020, Trump, as I say, had a 31% approval rating, but in Northern Virginia, they hated Donald Trump. He presided over a 35-day government shutdown. And we have so many federal workers in Northern Virginia. And Trump basically said, forget it, I don't care. You know, you realize when we have a shutdown, folks, everybody says, well, Congress will ultimately appropriate the money and they'll get it. But it may be a month or two later. That doesn't do you any good during the government shutdown to pay your rent or to put groceries on your table. So they were furious at Trump in Northern Virginia in the 2020 election. So I would, you know, and then as it relates to the Hispanic men, if you look at the exit data, the majority of them said that their life was worse off than it was 4 years ago. So they just didn't feel, you know, they felt everything was a little bit more expensive. I was a little surprised on the woman vote. Kamala won the woman vote by 9 points. Joe Biden won the woman vote by 15 points. And I thought, wrongly, that to have the first woman in the history of the United States of America be president would really motivate a lot of women voters. I will say I was also the chairman of the Hillary Clinton for President campaign in 2008. I was hoping that theory worked then, again in 2008. But I was surprised that she dropped on the women. And the youth vote, young people, all of you, Kamala won that by 8 points. Joe Biden won it by 23. So I think our party way overestimated the Dobbs decision in the power that was to motivate people to go to vote.
Absolutely. So let's open this up to questions, and I think there might be either a floating microphone or a microphone on the floor, and that gentleman had his hand up before, so I think he gets first dibs.
Hi, nice to meet you all. My name's Ellie. Actually, the Excellency and I have met before. Congratulations on your grandchild. That's awesome. I do want to say, though, with all that being said, that I am finding myself a little bit flustered listening to this panel because I'm not really hearing almost any accountability, and I feel like we are laying the framework to learn absolutely nothing, just like we learned nothing in 2016. And I think that the consultant class and corporations are laughing all the way to the bank at these answers. I think that we are just at this rate going to look for the next group of people to throw under the bus, just like in this election we threw immigrants under the bus, we threw Muslim people under the bus, and the next time it sounds like it'll be trans people that we throw under the bus when Kamala Harris refused to even say transgender through the course of this entire election cycle. I don't believe that this country is racist, sexist, or deeply ideologically conservative. You said it yourselves, Trump got the same amount of votes. Kamala Harris got 10 million less. People did not show up for her, and we should be asking the question of why, and it's not because she ran an excellent campaign. People in this country did vote for abortion, they voted for paid family leave, and they even voted for their Democratic senators. But Kamala Harris spent her entire 100 days of this election, which yes is a short amount of time, but touting around Liz Cheney when Dick Cheney is literally the least popular person in probably American political history. Bear-hugged Netanyahu, refused to separate herself from a genocide when, looking at the facts, everybody would have been much more likely to support her if she just would have supported an arms embargo, and literally was advocating for building the wall. And yeah, of course, everybody is going to move to the right, and move to the right, especially on immigration, when you capitulate to right-wing framing and refuse to defend the ground that we used to defend. And I guess that's my big point, is that I hope that we learn something, because I do feel like as a party that we used to believe in something, and they say that those who don't believe in anything will fall for everything. And I really think that we need to find ourselves as a party and what we actually believe in and go back to our roots of fighting for working class people and not just running to the right on everything. And I promise you will see a realignment if that's the trajectory that we continue towards, where we will do nothing for working class people and will barely mention them as an afterthought and continue to run to the right. So thank you.
Do you think that Kamala ran to the right?
obviously she was offering something, and I applaud her for those. I think that if you look at polling, those were some of her strongest points. But especially on things like immigration, I mean, she was giving a literal like speech as to why we need to be involved in every part of the world, which allowed Trump to, you know, obviously nobody like in this room, I'm sure, believes that Trump is a dove, but he was able to posture as a dove because we were defending every war in every part of the world all the time. One of the only things, well, Joe Biden was good on labor, but one of the few things that Joe Biden did good was withdraw from Afghanistan, and we can't even defend our ground on that. And I just think like when you let them posture as the people who care about the working class, as the people who are anti-war, yeah, of course we're going to lose. Like we need to defend our ground on immigrants and say that like we believe in these people and they matter for our country, and not be talking about building a wall and how great Liz Cheney was.
Yeah, and I think there's a good debate about the Liz Cheney thing. I didn't really think that was the smartest thing ever for a closing argument to have Liz Cheney. I didn't think it was a great idea the night before the election to have a big Beyonce concert. You know, most of the people at home can't afford to go to a Beyonce concert. You know, you should have been going door to door. So I agree. Listen, you know, 10 million less people showed up. I do think she leaned in on a lot of the working class issues. She talked about home ownership, what she wanted to do on paid leave, family medical leave. She did address those issues a lot. You know as well as I do in a presidential campaign, a lot of times it's hard to break through the echo chamber you're going out there. But you're right. I mean, the message obviously didn't work. I'm not going to disagree with you.
Hey, no other questions? Melissa, I'm going to let you carry the microphone and call the questions. So many hands are up. I don't know in what order. And introduce yourself, please, when you ask a question, if you're willing to do so, that is.
You got it. Well, hi, everyone. I know everyone on this panel, but sure. My name is Zaid Hamid. I'm a Master's of Public Policy student, and I worked with Dr. Victor on the Mason Votes team this election cycle, which, first of all, everyone give Dr. Victor and our Dem Lab Mason ambassadors a round of applause. My question is, what lessons should higher education learn from this election, both regarding how we prepare for elections in the future and how we prepare students for the modern political world?
So I'll take that one. Zaid mentioned the effort that we did at George Mason University this season for voter turnout. And it really was a tremendous effort. We were coordinated across multiple units on campus. We were coordinated with the local chapter of the League of Women Voters. We had 75 students, Mason voting ambassadors, who were registering students and going into classrooms and constantly canvassing and talking about. Now, if you're in that group of students that was doing some of that work, would you mind standing up? So because of the work of these students, these awesome students, every single precinct in Fairfax County had lower turnout this year relative to 2020, on average 9 points lower, except for Merton Hall, which only had a 1 point drop. So we were 8 points better, and that's because of the work of the students. We know that when you ask people to go and vote, they go and vote, and we asked a lot of people to go and vote. And so that tells me that, you know, higher education has not only a moral but also a legal obligation to civic community, to civic life, and to help students vote. And my work on this issue shows that we really can do that. It takes a lot of work. It is a ton of effort, as you well know, to help students vote. And I don't want to do a whole speech on the barriers that are there, but we know that there are effective ways to accommodate that. On your broader point about sort of higher education and the election lessons in general, and this maybe gets a little bit previously to the other gentleman's point. You know, I think there are, to co-opt James Carville's famous line from the '92 campaign, it is the economy stupid, but I think these days it's the inequality stupid. It's the inequality in our society that's driving partisan polarization, that's driving a lot of these effects that we're seeing, that's creating all of this discontent and incumbent anti-incumbent sentiment. We've got a housing crisis in the United States. People can't afford to buy homes, and homes is the number one way that people increase their wealth. And the racial wealth gap is hugely contributing to that inequality there. We've got an education financing crisis. Average student graduates college with $30,000 of debt these days. We have a healthcare cost crisis. I probably don't need to tell anybody in this room how crazy our healthcare pricing system is. And we have a dependent care crisis, whether it's childcare or elder care. Those four areas are hugely frustrating for a lot of Americans and are creating this barrier to economic mobility. And I would say that I don't think either political party is giving great answers on these questions. We have one political party that is scapegoating immigrants and telling lies and not playing sort of an honest game about how to solve those problems. And we have another political party that maybe has frankly been taking the non-white vote for granted for a number of years. And so I think we should be looking to our political parties to get more serious about policy answers to some of those questions.
I'll just add a couple of things. This is one of the few areas you're going to find me a little disagreeing with Jennifer. And this also relates to the earlier question. If the Democrats, and take it from a non-Democrat that have seen the other side and where it went, I left my party in 2016, the day that Donald Trump became the nominee. If you're going to go further to the left on all issues, and you're going to claim that that is the only thing that you are missing, that you didn't go far left enough, that inequality, and I'm a brown person, folks, right? And inequality is the issue. You are going to lose more and more and more of those red Americans that didn't vote on any of those four issues that you mentioned.
Oh, I think that's why red Americans voted
But
this direction, is because of that inequality, because they're frustrated by some of those same things.
yeah, but they're not worried about the $60,000 of their kids' tuition, and that's why they didn't vote. What we stopped teaching American civics in 8th grade. When was the last time you took American civics? In 8th grade. You maybe covered a little bit in high school. We don't teach it, and thus we are polarized. I have heard again and again and again, and this is my beef with the young generation. The ones that are sitting in the room are obviously engaged students. The majority of your colleagues in classes are not engaged. The majority of your colleagues in classes are not informed. Not only not informed, misinformed. You know how many people came up to me and says, I'm voting for the Green Party this year because I want them to get 5% so that they can get matching federal funds. Do you know what the Green Party stands for? These were Mason students and UVA students where I also lecture. No. Okay, that was the answer, right? Do you know how many people came and asked me about some of the misinformation that they read on social media, because you get your information from social media instead of reading? I had Julie Carey in one of my classes a couple of years ago. Out of my 28 students, not a single one knew who Julie Carey was. Not a single one knew who Julie Carey was. So youth engaged students are doing fantastic, and the numbers that Dr. Victor ran is amazing. But the majority of our student bodies are not engaged, and they're not informed. And I'll recognize one more person in the room, Dr. Andrew Flegel, the former Dean of Admissions at George Mason, now the president of the Consortium of Universities. We're not doing enough as a consortium. The universities together are not working together to deal with those problems, whether it is informing students or whether it is how do we deal with this so that we can get a more engaged, less polarized student body, so when they go out to the world, they're not following what they're seeing in the nasty political world out there.
Going to David's point, do you know what the number one Google question for 4 hours on Election Day was? Correct. Very good answer. Is
He said-
Biden still running? The number one Google
I'm done.
question. I made your point for you.
All right, Melissa, you're calling the questions.
I saw the hand up first, so I'm coming this way. Hi, my name is Jean Hensroth, and my question follows up on what you've been saying somewhat. Or could you comment on the impact of social media and disinformation, not misinformation, but disinformation? And I actually have a second question. how much do you think misogyny played in this election result?
I'll take the second one. Huge. I'll leave the first one to the others.
I was trying to delicately get at that on my previous answer. They will not tell a pollster they will not vote for a woman. They will not tell a pollster they won't vote for a black woman. It'll never show up on polling data. I lived through this, cheering a campaign. So it exists, no question about it. There's a reason why in this long history of our great country, we have never, ever elected woman president of the United States of America. I was hoping this year was going to be the time. And they are a majority of the voters in our country. But we have not won, the Democrats have not won white women. Bill Clinton won them in 92 and 96, and that's the last time, believe it or not. So I'm with you. I think it's time for a woman. I'm all for it. We've had very talented, qualified women running. I so worry about social media. We dealt with a lot. I can tell you the advent of AI has made this game so dangerous. There's someone who was convicted up in New Hampshire who did a Joe Biden ad, looked just like him, sounded wasn't Joe Biden. So the misinformation, the false stories that goes out every day, and they on the other side have a very powerful echo chamber. They have Fox News, which, you mentioned transgender. It's all Fox News talks about 24 hours a day. And then they go through their social media, and it gets everybody so angry. I'm tired of arguing with people. That just is not the truth. No, it is. I heard it on Fox News today. And yeah, it's very dangerous. And people aren't actually doing the research to find out if something that's said on television and social media is actually true. And we're going to have to figure this out because AI is going to change the whole dynamics of all this.
I would just add that if we look at these vote differentials, one of the questions, like the studies going forward, are going to be looking at whether or not what in the literature we call hostile sexism or racial animus contributed to this vote differential that we saw, or was it just the fundamentals? And my short answer is, frankly, we don't know yet. I'm going to wait for the studies before I can really provide an answer to that question. It'll take us a little while. But I do know by looking at other research that has been done on other elections, not at the presidential level, obviously, because we haven't had a woman president yet, but we know that when female candidates run, they win at the same rates as male candidates. We know that there is good evidence that female members of Congress, for example, are higher quality in terms of their legislative productivity and the benefits they bring back to their districts and so forth. And the theory is that women have to essentially compete so much through so much a gauntlet before they get there that you wind up with the cream of the crop who wind up getting through the door at the end. That said, we also know that in 2016, hostile sexism did predict vote for Trump and lack of vote for Clinton. And the Democratic Party answer to the Clinton loss in 2016 was hire the safest, straightest white man, oldest white man that you can, and that worked out for them. So one of my fears kind of is that what the Democratic Party is going to learn is when we nominate women, we lose, and when we nominate straight white men, we'll win. And I think that's really the wrong lesson. I actually don't see in the evidence, except for this sort of broad narrative that sounds nice on paper, I don't see in the data necessarily that is what is supported. But, we'll have to see where things go.
I would just say I would disagree with that. That is not going to be the message of our party. We have someone like Gretchen Whitmer, a great governor of Michigan. Very easily could be the nominee of our party. Yeah, we have some very qualified female governors who I think we're not going to just say it's a white straight guy, is hopefully who can come through this. But we have some real talent in women governors out there who I'm very hopeful will be our nominee in 2028.
Evening, folks. My name's Luke. I'm a member of Dr. Victor's very amazing Dem Lab. I'm from the great state of Maryland, and I wanted to ask this question tonight now. So in Maryland, I voted in the primary then, and there were a lot, and I mean a lot of offices. But when I came in Virginia, because I voted on campus to cast my ballot, it was just president, Senate, House, and then a couple of like Fairfax County things. And that's because Virginia elects its like offices in off years. And my question to you all is that a better system to leave most local issues on off years than it would to combine it all together, as most states do.
Well, there's a trade-off, right? Because the voter turnout is lower in the off years. So on the one hand, you wind up with a cleaner, shorter ballot on the even-numbered years, but then you wind up with lower turnout, and lower turnout elections, that means, you're getting more influence from sort of the moneyed interests and the people who are paying attention to politics and so forth. You're not getting as wide as a swath of the electorate. I think it's a shame in the United States that we ask our population to vote so often. That does, we know, depress some voter turnout. My interest is in democracy. It turns out democracy was, even though it was kind of on the ballot this year, it was not a motivating issue for enough people. And if Virginia, for example, did like Maryland and had these longer ballots, then voting itself is more of a chore, and that also can depress turnout. I grew up in California. My parents were telling me about the ballot that they voted on this year, and good Lord, I think it took them 2 hours to get through that ballot. So many ballot measures, and I mean, they do too much.
Is that why they're still counting?
Democracy. It's also
Is that why they're still counting?
Terrible system. Yes, it is. It very much is. Also that and 40 million people, but whatever. So I see this one both ways. I think there's trade-offs.
I'm very public on this. We have too many elections in Virginia. We should do like every other state, have them every 2 years. So you have a presidential turnout. Already, I can tell you, having received 12 calls today, the elections have started for 2025. This is the last thing I want to talk about. I can tell you, trust me. But so you have a presidential race, and then the next year you'll have a governor's race, and turnout's going to drop 50%, at least 50%. And yet at the end of the day, your governor is more important to you than your president. They build your roads, they run your health care, they run your education. They're in your life every single day, but turnout just drops. So I come from a place in democracy. We want as many voters as possible voting in elections. It is too expensive in Virginia, and it's too exhausting. And it puts too much emphasis on candidates who can raise money because it's all you do all day.
A couple quick Virginia questions. Should we allow eventually gubernatorial succession? We're the only state in the nation that does not allow re-election of governors.
100%.
Okay, good.
No, I just say that. I mean, we are the only state left in America.
Right.
We only get 1 4-year term.
Yeah.
I think it affects some governors. It didn't affect me. Some people may feel that they're lame ducks. I was charging through the door through my last day in office.
Yeah.
And vetoing bills, including some of mine.
I vetoed his bills, right through the end of the day.
And they're still friends.
Yeah, they should get to. Listen, if I had a magic wand, I think every governor, every president ought to have 1 6-year term.
Ah,
And
interesting.
it saves a lot of fundraising, and you're not beholden to anybody, and you get it. And if you can't do it in 6 years, you shouldn't be in office in the first place.
How about governor and lieutenant governor running on a party ticket in Virginia instead of separate balloting?
Ooh.
I would like that at the end of the day because your lieutenant governor really, and I loved my lieutenant governor. I really recruited him to run, but you only work a couple months a year. You get paid $17,000 a year.
Yeah.
You're really not really all that involved in the operations.
Mm-hmm.
Ralph and I are very close, but it's not like the lieutenant, presides over the Senate and breaks ties. Outside of that, the lieutenant governor really does much. If you had a ticket and do that, maybe you could expand the powers of the lieutenant governor. I would be for that.
And also,
Since we put the governor on the hot seat, if I may,
these are things that I'm really interested in. And we have a
electing
full-time
electing
legislature.
governor the same year as president.
I think you just
100%.
said that. Yeah.
Would I be
Governor
open
on
to
the
it?
same year as president? On the
No,
same
I
thing?
do every
on
2
the same-
years.
Yeah.
I don't want to get so fancy that I want to pick the years you do it. But if you did that in Virginia, you would always have a Democratic governor because of turnout. We'd always have a Democratic. Yeah, I'm for that.
Write that down.
Come on.
How about a full-time legislature instead of a part-time one?
Are you out of your mind?
Absolutely.
No, I'll
Okay.
tell you no. I'll
Okay.
tell you
States
no.
with professional legislatures
Yes.
have much better policy outcomes.
Okay, we'll talk later.
Yeah,
All right.
I'll disagree.
Sorry, I jumped in. There's so many hands up.
Neil.
Hello. For the professor straight in front of me, I forgot your name.
David.
David.
Just call me David.
I'm Neil. I really loved your points about immigrants tonight. So I had some questions about the immigrant vote. I'm a second-generation immigrant. Both of my parents had come from India. And one of the things that I noticed from Kamala Harris's campaign is that one of her main talking points was that she'd kind of push for the legalization of all 11 million immigrants in America. And we saw something like this similar happen back when Reagan got his 1986 Immigration Reform Act, which was really pushed through in 2004 during the Bush administration. But because of this, a lot of legal immigrants, such as my parents, had been pushed back all the way, and my parents only got citizenship in 2018. So would you say that Kamala Harris's kind of running off of that same trend alienated a lot of immigrant voters who came through from Asia or through legal pathways? Or do you think they kind of sympathized with illegal immigrants and went on her ticket?
Namaste. I love the
Oh,
Indian-
what?
I got elected by the Indian American vote in my district when I ran, and I'm very familiar with the culture, and I am very, very, very familiar with the immigration status. Without knowing your family's immigration case, which I spent good 15 years doing immigration consulting, I can absolutely guarantee you that your parents' case was not pushed back because of illegal immigration. Period. That is one of the biggest disinformation out there. The fact, or this disinformation, that illegal immigrants come in and take the line from legal immigrants is, with all due respect to everybody saying it, and I'm not going to mince my words, it's nothing but bullshit. All right? It is wrong. It's factually wrong. It is made to divide people. It is set out there. One, we don't have a line for people to go wait in. That was part of the problem why we have an immigration problem, right? Reagan legalized all the immigrants that were in the country in 1986, but didn't fix the immigration system so that we can bring people in an open market economy as we need. Whether it's H-1B visas, where 65,000 is only allowed every year on day one, in October 1 of every year, when they start accepting applications for H-1B visas, 250,000 applicants apply for 65,000 slots. Why do we have 65,000 slots? If we have 250,000 jobs open, I should be able to hire from India 250,000 excellent IT professionals. Why should there be limits when the economy asks for it, right? So no, this country was built by immigrants, should continue to be built by immigrants. We do need to secure our border, but we need to fix the immigration problem so that if I want to hire somebody to come work for me in my company, whether as a consultant or whether as an IT person, or whether it's somebody who's going to cook for my parents, or whether it's somebody who's going to drive, or somebody who's going to pick the oranges in my farm, I should be able to hire them with a single piece of paper, not the 3.5 to 4 years wait line that exists today. That is man-made because, and I'll tell you why it was man-made, and the blame goes on both. Both parties historically in Congress had stopped immigration reform for different reasons, right, at different times. It started with the Democrats. Democrats did not want immigration reform because immigrants do not unionize, and the labor unions pushed them not to allow for immigration reform. Period. Fact of life. Republicans came in and said, we don't want immigration reform because that means more immigrants are going to come in and they're going to look like you and me.
I kind of want to follow up on that.
Sure.
Thank you for that answer, but what I was kind of looking for is, how do you think that affected the immigrant vote in total? Because I understand, because I wasn't going off of that. I wasn't saying that illegals were taking positions in line. What I was really asking is, there are a lot of legal immigrants who believe this. Especially, I grew up in Austin, Texas, and we have a really strong South Asian population who actually do believe this. So, do you think that Kamala Harris running off of that alienated a lot of immigrant voters, or do you think that is not the case at all?
And we have
A lot of
4
voters-
minutes left. So
A lot of voters were alienated, but it wasn't because Kamala alienated them. It was because of the disinformation that came out. And sadly, yes, a lot of immigrants voted for Donald Trump versus Kamala, thinking that because we're legal, this is the old I got in and nobody else should get in anymore. And we need to get rid of that. and that was sadly the case. I'm happy to talk to you afterwards.
Thank you.
All right, very good. We're coming right to the end. Should we take one more question, Melissa, and then a closing comment?
Hi, I'm Lorena Jordan. I'm the Policy and Government Librarian here for George Mason. So I know 3/4 of our panelists, but I'm happy to meet you in person. Governor, Excellency Governor. Sorry, I'm from South Carolina, so we just have a governor, so we're not that fancy. One day.
Blame Thomas Jefferson for the title.
Trust me, McMaster no doesn't need anymore. They have enough attitude as is. But one thing that I think this might be a good closing question, actually, but I'm taking on civic engagement within my role as policy and government librarian. And the one thing I noticed even from this event and everything else I listened to, talked to, go to, express to, I think there's one common theme we can all agree on, which is that everybody right now is very fired up and excited to talk and analyze and understand this election, but where to go from here. So I would be very interested to hear what the panelists think. If you could tell, especially our college student population who are very excited and they want to know, they want to understand, but they also want to do something. What would you recommend for them in the next election year, a few election years, to be active in the community, to put their energy and their desire to change or keep status quo if they feel to move forward, in your opinion?
I need lightning round answers on this. All right.
I'll give you a top 10. The first 9 are read. Subscribe to a newspaper and read things. And, touch grass, like just get outside, connecting with the community. Building community is building democracy. Like that is the fabric of where democracy really happens. So, and for folks in the room who are feeling despondent and scared, we didn't really get into the doom and gloom of what might be ahead. I think this has been a really unlucky election. We had a huge anti-incumbent sentiment year where the opposition party happens to have been led by a populist convicted felon with authoritarian tendencies who's willing to use violence to subvert democratic processes. And that's just like by happenstance. It doesn't mean it's what Americans were necessarily asking for. So the response to that is to build community and to keep reading and try to avoid the conspiracy and misinformation cyclones that are out there.
This is my 13th presidential election. My only advice to you is you're going to win some, you're going to lose some. Don't ever despair. Stay engaged. I mean, we had record numbers of young people knocking on doors this year, more so than any presidential campaign we've ever had before, the number of volunteers. And you're going to have ups and downs in this business. Stay engaged. Support the candidates whom you believe in. And the other thing I'd say to all you young people, with social media and all that, we've really driven a wedge in our country today. That wedge should not exist. We're still the great United States of America. Last year I went to 26 foreign countries. I got to tell you, folks, there's not a country in the world that does not look at America as the great nation, as a symbol for them, as a leader of democracy. And when you engage in people from the other party, they're not your enemy. You can have difference of policy and positions. Stay open, listen to people, don't get in fights with people, stay positive, stay energetic, stay in the game. It's the greatest nation on earth. But it's only going to be if the young people in this audience and around the country stay engaged. You gotta stay engaged, and you gotta be involved in the battles.
Did you want to add to that, David?
Certainly, I'll second both opinions. Read, stay engaged, but bring it back to the misinformation, disinformation, and I'm going to add on a burden on you, the engaged few of your generation, especially the young, is that you got to spread that to the rest. You got to call misinformation, and you got to share what you learned from reading and engaging with the rest. And certainly engage with the other side as well. The governor and I are on the opposite side of the political spectrum, right? But we developed a friendship, a personal friendship, and a working relationship, and we worked very well together, even though we disagreed 80% of the time. And I wasn't joking when he was vetoing my bills. But yeah, when he ran for governor, I went and supported him. This is about relationships. And these relationships make a difference as you go not only through the political world, but in your life and in your professional world as well?
So, a couple things, just announcements, if I may. As a part of your engagement, we have an event here Wednesday night with the Virginia Public Access Project. It's called After Virginia Votes, so we will be looking specifically at what happened in Virginia this year with the campaign managers of the Republican and Democratic campaigns in Virginia, along with myself and my colleague Bob Holsworth of Virginia Commonwealth University. And then on Thursday, November 14th, 7 p.m. in the auditorium, the Michael V. Hayden Center is going to do an event with several very distinguished journalists who cover national security affairs, and they're going to have a program on the presidential transition, national security, and intelligence issues, and what does it all mean going into the new administration. So there's a lot to unpack there as well, of course. Yeah, exactly, deep concerns. But anyway, regardless of which party you belong to, who you voted for, I appreciate you for being here, being engaged with George Mason University, the Schar School of Policy and Government, and the Mason Square campus, which does a wonderful job of putting on various public events and does outreach to the community. And I see a lot of people from the community who are here. Please continue to come to these programs, keep hope alive, stay engaged, and we're all going to be fine. So have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Yes, thank you to our presenters. I'm going to ask them to stay up here for a photo opportunity. But if y'all could, please clean up. I appreciate it. There is some pizza left. I have no more plates, but I'm sure y'all are going to figure that out. Thank you all for coming.
Share our plates.